and welcome to the second panel of the American University Autonomous Vehicle Forum. This afternoon, we're fortunate enough to have a discussion regarding the city-state and how they will be preparing for and already reacting with autonomous vehicles. The US population is approximately 330 million people. We live in states and cities, rural and suburban communities, and transportation is important for all of us, for access to food, jobs, whether we're running our farms or accessing healthcare. Transportation provides mobility, and mobility is tantamount to freedom. While to date we don't have a comprehensive federal legislative policy with regard to autonomous vehicles, several states and cities across the country have enacted local laws to allow for the mapping, testing, and deployment of autonomous vehicles. During this forum, I thought that it would be important to hear from regulatory bodies on what they see as challenges and in some instances triumphs in the autonomous vehicle space and the impacts on their citizenry. I'm happy this afternoon to introduce representatives of Fairfax County, Virginia, Maryland State Government, and Washington, D.C. I'm going to introduce them each individually and let them tell you a little bit about themselves. I will start with Etta Napathian, and she's from Virginia. Etta?
Thank you so much, Shalika. Thank you so much for this opportunity to participate in this event. I really appreciate it. So yes, hi, I'm Etta Nahapetian, and I am the Economic Initiatives Coordinator in Fairfax in our Department of Economic Initiatives. And I've been at the county for quite a while. I won't tell you exactly how long, and I've been working on growing and nurturing our innovation ecosystem.
Thank you so much. And I want to turn to Anthony Willingham, who's also from DC government. Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony Willingham. Since June of 2019, I've been a policy analyst at the District Department of Transportation. Prior to that, for about 6 years, I worked at the council, the DC Council, for Council Member Mary Che, who's chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee. And most importantly, I am American University class of 2013. So I'm really happy to be here, really happy to be back, albeit virtually. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you, we're happy to have you. I'm gonna go to Carol DeLeon from Maryland State Government.
Good afternoon, everyone. Carol DeLeon. I work for the Maryland Department of Transportation, State Highway Administration. I lead the Connected and Automated Vehicle Program for the State Highway Administration. And we have liaisons and a working group for the statewide efforts and a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll talk about today. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I want to get now to, I'll call it Etta's partner in crime, Dale. Dale,
hi.
Go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Dale Castello, and as Salika said, I am one of Etta's colleagues at Fairfax County, where I support her work in the Department of Economic Initiatives and also support some work out of the Office of the County Executive. My focus is primarily on strategy and innovation, but my background is transportation and mobility. So, and like Etta, I don't want to tell you how long I've been doing that, but it's a very, very, very long time. So, but I've been a partner with Etta on the county's Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Pilot Project.
Thank you very much. So I know that you all have some type of autonomous vehicle testing, mapping, or riding on your roadways. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what they are. I'll start with Fairfax County, Virginia.
Hi, so Fairfax County and Dominion Energy are partnering on an autonomous electric shuttle demonstration project. It's called Relay. It's the new electric self-driving shuttle that makes a loop between the Dunloring Metro and Mosaic. And I'm gonna try to get if I can share my screen to show you a visual of it.
Thank you.
Is it working?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Yes, so the shuttle is, it's a demonstration project that's scheduled to run for 1 year. It's operating right now. We launched a few weeks ago, so please do come take a ride. It's operating from Monday through Thursday from 10 to 2. It's we're trying to operate in a low traffic time, so that's why the hours are that. This really is a culmination of our work for several years in expanding and nurturing the innovation ecosystem in the county and partnering with our key stakeholders in the county to address our most pressing challenges, and mobility certainly is one of them. So we're joined with by the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our VDOT has been a great partner in this, as well as Edens, which is the real estate developer of the Mosaic District. They've been hosting Relay. And we, of course, have received a grant from our Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. They are really interested in this technology and how it can be used as a first mile, last mile mobility solution. So this project, it's pretty exciting. It's the first state-funded autonomous public transportation demonstration project in Virginia. And for us, you know, Fairfax is very single occupant vehicle dependent, and mobility is evolving worldwide. So this pilot project is going to help us learn about the technology and how it can benefit the communities that we serve. So we're very excited about it.
Thank you, Etta.
Sure.
Anthony, can you tell me what's happening in the district?
Sure, we've got about 18, anywhere between 15 and 20 autonomous vehicles operating on our streets at any given moment. Those are split among 3 companies, each with anywhere from 5 to 7 vehicles each. 2 of them are exclusively mapping and data collecting. Only one is actively actively engaging the autonomous driving system.
Thank you. And Carol?
Sure. So I'm going to stick on a note that Etta just said, a publicly funded program. There's so many different ways these vehicles can actually be deployed on the roads. And so Maryland has focused on allowing the private companies to deploy on public roads. So we have 3 companies. We have Local Motors Ollie, which is the autonomous shuttle. They've been piloting in National Harbor and doing similar to what you heard from Fairfax. Small routes, low volume, sort of easier location to pilot. We have a company called Steer Tech, locally grown, Maryland, women business owned. It does autonomous parking. It's almost like a valet feature. So you have your cell phone, you get dropped off, you press the button, the car goes and parks itself. It finds its own parking spot. And then when you're done doing whatever you're doing, you press the button on your phone again, it comes, picks you up at your pickup location. Very exciting. Don't have to walk in the rain anymore. And then the third one is robotic research. A lot of people probably know robotic research. They've worked a lot in Department of Defense and that kind of work, but they're also working on software and autonomous shuttles as well. They're piloting different shuttles, but they're up in the Gaithersburg, Clarksburg area. So those are the 3 that we have, and they are operating in mixed use traffic, not just a small, controlled environment, though they have done those before as well.
It's very exciting. As I started out in the discussion, there's no real comprehensive federal legislation on autonomous vehicles, but do you have specific laws in your jurisdictions that speak specifically to autonomous vehicles and their usage? So I'll go back to Carol and ask you about that.
Yeah, so the short answer is no. Maryland does not have a straight law that says an autonomous vehicle can be just out on the road. But there's interest in understanding what the laws look like and what their intents were, because some people will look at it and say, well, technically an AV is allowed because they don't say it's not allowed. Okay, we don't want to go that route. Yeah, and so we're trying to do a law review to understand those. And then what we did do, however, in the meantime, is give an opportunity for those companies to pilot in a safe manner. So we've used a highly automated vehicle permitting process, and it's a self-assessment, so it's voluntary. But we've gotten success through that, and it's similar to the USDOT 12-point. Let's work through this and talk together. But we add on law enforcement reviews and then engineering reviews. So those are the guidance that we've got in Maryland.
Thank you. And in Fairfax, Virginia, do you have anything specific?
I would say that our short answer is also no. The last two administrations, governors' administrations in Virginia, have both taken a hands-off approach to any sort of regulatory framework for automated vehicles. Frankly, I think this is just a response that they don't want to stymie or create any regulatory hurdles. They want to, have open arms for any research or testing that wants to be done. We have one of our universities, Virginia Tech, the Transportation Institute in Blacksburg, is doing an incredible amount of research in this space. So I don't think they wanted to do anything to upset that business item that the university's been able to capitalize on. Now working with VDOT, there are safety reviews through their research council. And they do provide a fair amount of oversight, but it's basically advice. It's not so much a regulatory hurdle for us.
And then Anthony, what about Washington, DC?
Sure, this is actually a really great time to ask that question because about 2 months ago, maybe last month, Council passed legislation that improved upon legislation passed in 2013. Back in 2013, Council was one of the first jurisdictions in the country, if not the first, to pass a law that legalized autonomous vehicles to operate in the public roadway in DC. And just a month or so ago, a second piece of legislation passed that created a proper testing program. It tasked my agency, the District Department of Transportation, with creating a testing program that would permit autonomous vehicles to operate in the street after being vetted through a permit approval process. It permits or requires DDOT to require of the permit holders to provide us data and information about our right-of-way. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to take a look at that.
I think those are key things. When I started off the conversation, I referred to the citizenry, the residents in each of your respective jurisdiction. And I want to turn to public sentiment and public engagement. When I lecture, it's one of the sort of cornerstones of my discussions when I talk about equity and jobs and healthcare and access to food. I also talk about, does the public know what's going on? What's public sentiment and public engagement like in your communities? So I'm going to ask you first, Anthony, and then I'll move to Maryland and Fairfax.
Sure. So most of our public engagement about the autonomous vehicles that are operating here has been through the formal process of government, formal channels of government. The DC Council has held about at least three hearings on autonomous vehicle testing. And the mayor has created an autonomous vehicles working group. The formal members of the working group are government agencies, regulatory agencies that are creating the testing programs. But members of the public are invited to participate, and in fact, they do. There was a long list of witnesses testifying before council opining on autonomous vehicle policy. We engage with a lot of members of the community through the autonomous vehicles working group and the connections that each agency brings. So for example, the Office on Aging and the Office on Disability Rights are members of the Mayor's Autonomous Vehicles Working Group. So through their connections, we have presented policy ideas and taken feedback from advisory groups and affected communities who are interested. So the main discussions that we've been having with the public are among those that are with those that are interested in this issue and are interested in how the technology impacts their life. I think once because like I said, we only have about 18 to 20 vehicles on the street, if that. Once the program becomes more robust, we'll talk about a larger engagement strategy.
Okay. Carol?
Yeah, one thing I've learned from having spoken to a whole bunch of different states is the working groups are a key function to discuss these opinions or ideas, and you start seeing this spread of fields that you never thought of before. Like your Department of Aging is now part of the discussion, and your university health center is part of the discussion because you will no longer have organs. How does that work? So there's this interesting spread of the public perception and who actually is part of the conversation. I do believe that there's been a bit of either reticence or we're just not able to get to getting the public really involved and really talking to them about autonomous vehicles. And there's some surveys out there that will tell you, before they actually go in an autonomous vehicle, it's like 40% maybe will want to go in an AV again. But then after they've gone in one, they're like, oh, it's not so bad. Actually, I get bored of it. So, it rises to 80%. I think we should do more of that and reach out to the public and really try to make them understand first what this technology can do, but what it can't do as well, and then where we're going to go with it. In Maryland, so a lot of states have the working group. So we have a working group. Similar to DC, we have a lot of state agencies, local jurisdictions. We have a lot of private companies. We don't have as much from the public. And I think this is where Maryland could probably do a little bit more of. So like if you were part of Maryland, we would bring you and help us teach our public. But I come from the planning background. So NEPA is big, right? And we do public workshops and we do a whole year-long review. I don't know that we've gotten to that point almost anywhere in the nation. There's some people who have done a great job of reaching out through Facebook and trying to educate people. But I think we can do a lot more. And I want to see a lot more in that realm to understand the needs. Because just like during this pandemic, we saw the CAV community rise to the occasion for food delivery service. And they didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but then it became a big deal because it was a need for the public. So I think that relationship with the public is really important, understanding their needs. And we have the mechanisms to talk to them. So I think it's just about reaching out and bringing them in.
Thank you. Either Dale or Etta, what's happening in Fairfax in terms of your community involvement and engagement?
So first, I definitely want to echo what Anthony and Carol said about our connections and with the aging advocates and the disability community as well. We've reached out to them, and they have also very avidly reached out to us at the launch of the project. There's an extreme amount of interest in the project as a solution for them. But generally, people have been very excited and positive about the project. I would say actually that our public engagement for this project started maybe 2 years before deployment. Maybe even, I would say, while the project was still just a gleam and apple and Dale and my eye, we were talking about growing the innovation ecosystem and the research footprint. All that was relatively new concepts. And our new focus for us as a county specifically. And so we set out to bring everybody on the same level of education on the importance of emerging technology and what was happening on the ground. And we enlisted thought leaders to come and offer insights on emerging tech and just to really have a conversation about what roles and responsibilities local government could play in their deployment. So that's how we started. We had a series of events. We called them salons. We had that focused on automation and technology and its potential impact. We had the county's first hackathon, and it focused on mobility, and that was a super fun event. And that's kind of how we had it. So hopefully, and the point of it really was to increase the stickiness and the relationship with the universities and the research institutions, and also to familiarize staff with the emerging tech. So that was kind of like the way we were doing it. And it really was also to kind of send out a signal to all the stakeholders that we're a place for innovation. And that brought a lot of partners to us. That kind of helped make a lot of things happen because we were sending the signal through these events. So hopefully when Relay showed up out on the street, it did not come out of the blue. And hopefully we had really framed it by having those events up front, and hopefully people see it as a natural progression of that work. We did end up being able to have one public meeting in February 2020, and we had the signs go up on the corridor for the vehicle before COVID hit. But then everything kind of changed as far as our public engagement after COVID. And so we pivoted. We ended up sending a very large mailer out, and we've got some fun videos on our website. And, you know, we have plans to do some really fun activities, you know, things to attract people to Mosaic, which to kind of do the educational piece on the project, but which is difficult now with COVID. But one thing we're hoping we might be able to pull off is Santa on CAV. So that would be something really fun, we hope. We also do have a survey. We're partnering with George Mason University on a human factors survey. And if I can pull it off, I'm gonna try to put a link to the website in the chat so people could go ahead and fill out the survey and help us out that way.
Thank you. I think that's all important. One of the things that, again, when I lecture and I'm in lots of different stakeholder groups, I realize we need to do more for the public. So it's wonderful to hear that you're all engaging in some form or fashion. And I want to say that if there's somebody out there who is able to do it or get it done, I think we need places like the All-Star Game or the World Series or the Super Bowl, where we have PSAs advising the public of what autonomous vehicles are and what they aren't, the wonderful benefits that they have, and that they will eventually, they're not displacing anybody tomorrow, but that they will eventually be part of our community. And I think if we start to have those kind of educational opportunities for the public, that's great. I'm an academic advisory member of PAVE, Partnerships for Autonomous Vehicle Education here in Washington, D.C. And we do all we can to make sure that we're educating all stakeholder communities, but most especially the public. And when we talk about education and outreach and how people are collaborating together, I want to talk about the collaboration between government and industry. So I am neither, right? I'm sort of like Solomon in between. There is this thought among industry when you hear industry speak that AVs are here. Some people act as if they've completely figured it out 100% and we could be widespread tomorrow. I also hear from government representatives who have been hearing about AVs for 10 plus years and are a little skeptical that AVs are really ready for prime time and that they're safe enough or that they are able to be widespread tomorrow. So what do you think government and industry could do better, and especially from the industry standpoint, to work better with government and kind of share what they're doing and make this a better communication roadway? So I'll turn to Etta for that.
Well, I'm gonna turn it over to Dale.
Okay.
And,
yeah. There's
a piece of it.
Salika, there's so much we could say about this. You know, I would just start by saying that, you know, when we originally reached out to the industry, we reached out in the context of research and testing, and they were pretty silent. You know, in fact, their message to us is that, you know, we're sort of beyond research and testing. We're actually looking at full deployments. Never mind that NHTSA wouldn't allow a full deployment at this point in time. But, you know, so and then the conversation shifted to supporting infrastructure. You know, communications with the vehicle and you know, signal prioritization and, you know, getting signal phasing and timing data fed to the data, and all these things. You know, it's not just a vehicle going up and down the road. There's all this supporting connectivity that comes along with it. And, you know, they were relatively silent. They didn't really want to play their cards in terms of how you know, we could help them or how they could possibly help us kind of shape a framework or shape some sort of policy guidelines around it. I just think, you know, it sounds terrible, but I just think if they were a little more forthright in what their challenges are and look to us as potential collaborators, I think this would go a lot smoother. You know, our best partner in terms of the research collaboration was actually VDOT and their partner, Virginia Tech. You know, and we were sort of, it was sort of a one-sided negotiation. You know, they were saying, oh, well, the industry kept saying, well, you know, we might want to learn that, but, you know, we're doing that somewhere else. Or it was tricky. It was really a crazy dance to, and I hope that makes sense. I mean, it's like a poker game and nobody wanted to play all their cards.
Oh, I understand that. And I think, you know, certainly for those in the industry who are listening right now, it is incumbent on us to lay our cards on the table, as you said. We have to work hand in hand together between the creators and the regulators. Otherwise, the technology will come and it will sit on a shelf. So we need to be honest about where we are today, where we expect to be tomorrow. And then we obviously also want a government that is open to the ideas of innovation, not stymieing progress, but working together to make it possible. I want to, along those lines of sort of making it possible, we know that although there are local laws in jurisdictions across the country, you could take Pittsburgh or cities in California, cities in Arizona, and on, there is no robust federal legislation around autonomous vehicles. And so I'm going to turn to Maryland and ask you, what do you think the repercussions are of not having a sort of robust federal framework to work with?
Yeah, I was listening to Dale, and he said NHTSA's not allowing it. That's sort of where we're at, right? So I think that there's two big things that happen when there's not a clear nationwide, this is what we're doing. First one is you're stagnating innovation. You can't move forward if you don't know what your boundaries are. And I think of them as like when you're bowling and you've got the bumpers up and now you can, bowl. So it's starting there. It's not to say that they haven't done anything and that they're not paying attention. NHTSA is paying attention, NTSB is paying attention, Federal Highway, they're all paying attention. But we're lacking an actual framework to say everybody go this direction and move. And so what happens is the second problem. You start having patchwork legislation at different state levels. So, your Arizonas are going to be different from your Pittsburgh, your Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, everywhere else. Florida is going to be different. Maryland's going to be different. And what happens there is the private industry will say, I don't want to change how I deploy for every single state that I approach. So I'll just stick with one or two states that I know I can deploy in, which then biases the deployments to those states only. So you have to be able to say, okay, these are the types of vehicles that will be allowed, or here are the exceptions, and the exceptions are being provided based on these standards or these, boundaries of how much you can fail or not fail. There is, back to your public perception thing, there's still a perception even at our level of saying these vehicles have to be perfect, otherwise they can't deploy. The fact is the technology is not perfect, but if you cannot provide those boundaries for them to fail a little bit or have a controlled environment by which you can improve, you're never going to get to perfect. And you're never going to get the innovation that you need to reach all the communities and all people with disabilities, or anybody who needs access to mobility, or safety just in general, like number one thing. So I think if you can't create this framework, you're stagnating innovation and you're causing these patchwork legislations. Those are the two big takeaways from my perspective.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in on that in terms of the federal framework, or whether there is one or there isn't one, and how it impacts you in your jurisdictions?
I would just say that from our personal experience, it seemed to me that although NHTSA doesn't have a framework, they clearly have developed a process over time. And it seemed to me they basically took our particular project and separated it into two parts. One, the vehicle, and then two, the operating environment, which we were proposing to operate the vehicle in. And, you know, as part of that, the vehicle is a pretty well-known commodity to NHTSA. They see these pilot projects over and over and over. So they tend to be very familiar with their capabilities and, you know, what's in the next software update. And they have very good relationships with the industry partners. The operating environment is really the tricky thing. I mean, every operating environment's a little different. And the complexity of that operating environment is really where NHTSA scrutinized our particular project. I mean, everything down to, you know, as Etta mentioned earlier, you know, the time of day that we're operating, no peak hour service. We have a school in proximity to our route. We cannot operate near that school during school hours, even though school is basically shut down in Fairfax County, all online learning at least. So it made it very uncertain in terms of how to deal with every little detail. So they have a process, but they clearly just don't have a framework in terms of how they go about reviewing and approving these projects.
Thank you, Dale.
And so there's also been efforts from, you know, legislators to create the frameworks or give the authority to NHTSA to make those frameworks. So the Self-Drive Act was sort of this first attempt to create this framework or allow the authority to do things. But that was in 2017, right? And that was 3 years ago. And they tried this year to push it, but elections. So that didn't quite work out. And we're hoping next year it comes back. That's still 4 years almost lost where we couldn't do much because we were waiting for this language to come through. So if we can get that through, we'll move much faster. And it's there, it's just so close. So I hope they get it through.
Well, crossing our fingers, they're listening. Anthony, do you have anything you want to add on that?
No, just that yes, to recognize that testing across the country can look very different. So whatever recommendation or policy is set, leave room for jurisdictions to tailor their testing programs to their needs. In the district, you know, we're 100% urban jurisdiction. So testing here is going to look very different than testing on rural highways in other parts of the country. So allowing us to have the leeway to create a program that suits our needs would be appreciated.
No, that's a good point. You know, I started off talking about, you know, our citizenry is in rural, suburban, cities, all kinds of environments, and we need to be acutely aware that driving looks very different in each of those environments. I want to turn to, I want to say the cornerstone of what I love to talk about is equity in transportation. Mobility, as I said, allows us to have access to food and healthcare and good jobs. I want to delve into how autonomous vehicles in your jurisdiction might address those issues. I'll turn to Fairfax, Virginia, and maybe you could answer that a little bit more.
Well, I'll start and I'll let Dale add. And Dale, you're on mute if you're, but yeah, I mean, for Fairfax, you know, Fairfax has adopted what we call the One Fairfax policy, which is for us to have a frame of equity in all of our policies and everything that we do in the county. So it's something that it's in the front of our mind strategically as we're thinking through what we're addressing. So we are having this conversation in every way. And I will say that, as I said, this is an incredible potential tool to help folks in our aging community and the disability community. At the one workshop that we had, one public meeting that we had in February before the shutdown, we had these two women that sat in the front row, and we were worried, like, they came early. They were like, are they going to be like yelling and complaining? And they were like, no, we're going to be first in line. We're going to be the first ones to take this vehicle because one of them was visually impaired and the other one had a husband in a wheelchair. And they're like, we can't wait. So the fact that our vehicle has a ramp that's very easy to wheel in, it's just, so the community really is really kind of visualizing what's possible. And Dale, I know that you have a lot of thoughts on where we can take this in the future and the potential for this in the future.
Yeah, I mean, so just as a reminder, our pilot is a low-speed shuttle. You know, has a capacity of about 12 passengers. And we deploy it at this time as part of our research and testing on a fixed route basis. But we have talked a lot about deploying it as an on-demand service. And, you know, it could look and operate a lot like a microtransit, you know, piece. And I just call it another tool in our transit toolbox that we could deploy in an on-demand basis that could really be a game changer for the disabled community. If you know how ADA rules are now, 24-hour reservations, and you know all the constraints that come along with paratransit services, it's tough. It's very tough for that population. So I think it could be an amazing tool. And for other reasons too. I think it also, for aging in place, for seniors and elderly, I think the vehicles themselves can penetrate neighborhoods and communities that aren't conducive to 40-foot buses, and without having, you know, the labor costs associated with it. And of course, my assumption here is that the price of the vehicles will come down over time. But I think it opens some doors for some new types of public transit to serve some underserved communities and underserved populations that would really benefit. So,
thank you very much. You know, we're in a very unique time in America and frankly globally as we address the effects and repercussions of the pandemic. Anthony, has mobility and transportation changed in the district as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, of course. Where to start? We are engaging in, sorry, I'm not sure how much this, what we've been doing related to the pandemic is related to autonomous vehicles, but we're preparing for the current situation and the future. Right now, we're repurposing a lot of curbside to prioritize buses and bicycles and walking by extending sidewalks and bus, bike, trying to make alternative forms of transportation more attractive and accessible. We have heard the kind of murmurs that the pandemic is going to push a lot of people back into their cars. So we're trying to make alternative forms of transit much more attractive. We've also started what we're calling a streeteries program, where we've taken the curbside and reserved it for restaurants throughout the duration of the pandemic. We've restricted just under 30 miles of street to local traffic via our Slow Streets initiative to give people, to afford people public space to socially distance and recreate outdoors in the time of this pandemic. I guess related to autonomous vehicles, we actually had one of our providers, the most recent, operator, came to the district because of the pandemic. Their operations are food delivery. They do food delivery right around the Navy Yard area, right near the DDOT headquarters. So yeah, we're looking at what we can do now to make sure people can travel and exist in the public space safely, can be in their homes safely, and prepare for the future when we reemerge out of the public health emergency.
Thank you, Anthony. I think the question really stems around from a policy standpoint. We know that autonomous vehicles are part of that new wave and new innovation. And so if there's a shift in a mobility strategy for the district or for other cities, that's really part of our new wave and new mobility strategy. And when we're looking at that strategy, one of the things that we hear is that widespread use of autonomous vehicles might impact revenue collected from cities from driving infractions, meaning people won't be speeding, they won't be running red lights, they won't have all this bad behavior that then leads to revenue from infractions. Is this true? Is this something that DC sees as a future? And if so, are you preparing for that?
I would say there's maybe two answers to that question. One is the council and the mayor. One is that the automated traffic enforcement program is for safety, not revenue. And the second answer is we'll cross that bridge if and when we come to it. The council and the mayor are agree that the automated traffic enforcement system is for safety. In fact, the past 2 or 3 major changes that the executive branch wanted to make to the program were scrutinized heavily by the council member who chairs the committee on transportation and environment because they may be seen as revenue generating. Council legislation and the council member who chairs the committee has been very vocal that she wants to dispel the notion that the cameras are speed traps. Second, I don't foresee, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We're kind of seeing the revenue impact on new technologies right now, and it's not the end of the world. The district isn't relying detrimentally on revenue from citations. T&Cs, in fact, have been, over the past 3 years, the reasons cited by government agencies for reduced revenue from parking tickets and meter revenue. And honestly, when we see the budget numbers, are just happy that the lower numbers have good explanations and aren't indicative of some hidden systemic economic problem. And then lastly, we just don't know what the technology is going to provide for the future. The number of times I'm asked that question about revenue is equal to the number of times I'm asked, well, what about a future where the car has a function to moderately violate traffic rules, extremely violate traffic rules because I'm in a rush and need to get somewhere? We just don't know. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
I think it's something we'll have to take up with the industry insiders and manufacturers, because they'll ultimately have the opportunity to create those functions on the car or not. I want to talk to Maryland. Some jurisdictions have taken a very aggressive stance towards autonomous vehicles and have set up what I call AV cities. Other jurisdictions have said that they don't want the technology in their city boundaries, and they don't want it operating on their roadways. Do you have a viewpoint on this aggressive versus cautious approach, and which do you think is best?
So I'd probably say there's no best solution, or if there's a best solution, it's the one that jurisdiction is prepared for. And that's where you got to start. So I would never tell a city or a local jurisdiction that's hunkering down and is afraid of this to just open up, because there's probably two things or some things going on. The first one might be just lack of knowledge. So they may not be aware of what the technology can and cannot do. And so they're really hunkering down. They're like, no, never going to do this. So just that should be a barrier that's broken. We should be able to talk and communicate. That's both on industry, it's on state, it's on federal, to really talk through that, just sort of fear of what the technology can and cannot do. But there's also a perspective that some jurisdictions just don't have the manpower to manage what's needed to deploy these vehicles. So if you don't have the subject matter expertise, you may not know that you may want to have a certification or assessment of whatever is being deployed. If they don't know that, they might be putting something out there that is unsafe. So it's a bit of two things, and it really does depend on what the jurisdiction is reacting to when they're hunkering down. When they're aggressively deploying, that's a little bit different. That's maybe a little bit more on the, I want to attract companies to our state and I want to promote that kind of economic benefit. On that side, I'd probably say, look again and just be a little bit more cautious of what is being deployed. We know from talking to some companies that they are not as aware sometimes of the rules of engineering and why we deploy or build or design our roadways a certain way. So, you know, when anecdotal information, a company didn't know about the METCD and how signs have to be put out a certain way, and you can't just put out a bunch of signs in a row and that's okay. Like, no, that's not okay. But if you're able to have those communication channels to talk about that, that company then learned about it and they become better at deploying. So there's two ends of the spectrum. The main thread is that everybody needs to be able to talk to everybody, and you need to have those channels in place now so that when a company comes to you, you know what to do, or that you have the subject matter expert at the state or at the federal level that can come down and provide that perspective for you. So if you're ready, you're probably okay. If you're going one way or the other, try to talk to someone and understand where you're going.
Well, those are all good points, thanks. And when you talk about communication, I want to probably turn this one over to Fairfax. Communication between your project, autonomous vehicles, and law enforcement and first responders. You know, have you looped them in terms of interaction with the vehicle? And what has that been like? Do they have specific concerns that they want the industry to know about when it comes to law enforcement and first responders interacting with AVs?
Yes, yeah, thanks, absolutely. You know, we have actually, they're very interested. One, because our police and fire and rescue are very cutting edge. You know, they do try to stay on top of the technology. So they do appreciate the opportunity to kind of learn about this kind of technology up front. So we've set up a series of training sessions with them before deployment. So in a parking lot, so they can just walk around and just have the vehicle to themselves and really understand them. They have the questions. One question, for example, is like, where's the battery? You know, if there's a fire, want to know where the battery is. You know, what are the, you know, what are the different kind of, what should we be aware of as far as what's dangerous or not? We've also have a kind of open, ongoing communication with police regarding enforcement of the existing traffic laws there. The main concern right now with Relay has been because it's a slow moving vehicle. It's going very slowly, so there are some vehicles passing it right now. So we're asking police to do some extra enforcement, and we have extra signs on the route. You know, but having a slow vehicle going there is not necessarily a bad thing. Cars in that corridor have historically gone too fast. You know, there's been complaints from residents about cars going too fast. A few years ago, somebody was hit and was really hurt. She broke a bunch of bones. You know, so it's actually in some ways a good thing. So just being partnered with law enforcement to kind of slow the vehicle, the speed on that corridor. So those are the kinds of things we've been doing recently with that.
Okay. We have a few questions from the audience, so I want to get a couple of those in. There is a question about jobs and whether there's a belief that jobs will be created in the region with the use of the expansion of the use of autonomous vehicles. I'm not sure which one of you want to jump in on that.
I'll jump in just for a quick second, because really our project really very much kind of came from an economic perspective. Was our initial goal was to grow and nurture the emerging tech industry here in Fairfax. So we definitely have had that frame from the beginning. That's something that we want. We want these companies to come here to do their research. We want these companies to come base their headquarters here in Fairfax because these are fast growing companies. It's emerging technology. We want them to see we want to send the signal to them that this is a place to do business, so, and to do their business. So that's definitely kind of part of our, so there's a lot of potential for jobs in that sense.
Okay. Anybody else want to touch on the job creation?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe it will create more jobs, and it's not going to be a continuous creating jobs. It's probably more like this jump of high tech type of jobs that you'll see. You know, the vehicle has to be maintained. So all those sensors, right, that are being used to operate, they have to be fixed. They're never going to last forever. So all those mechanical jobs will have to have that step up of making the sensor work, calibrate it, refine it, whatever. There's going to be more jobs on the state side. As Etta just mentioned, you know, we have to bring up our own subject matter expertise. So new jobs in that engineering and, you know, outreach and data ethicists, because you're going to get all this data. So there's fundamentally going to be more jobs, but you will see this shift towards the tech industry. On our side, we also have maintenance of the roadway infrastructure that we take into account. And I see a lot of job needs there. We have some now, maybe, you know, 10, 15 actual state employees. I will need way more to maintain an entire system of sensors, good pavement, etc. So fundamentally, my belief is there will be more jobs, but you will see changes in what those jobs are.
Anthony, I think you wanted to chime in a little bit on that as well.
Sure, briefly. The DC Council commissioned a study on autonomous vehicles and the impact it would have, the many impacts it would have on not only the district, but the region. And one of the findings related to jobs was that there's a potential for an increase of white collar jobs in the district and lower skilled jobs outside of the district. And the reason that's significant to us is that we're a small jurisdiction and we don't want to invite this technology that's going to push certain jobs and certain people outside of the district farther away from where jobs are in the core at the in favor of white collar jobs. So it's something that we're aware of, and part of our testing program, or the reason why we are creating a testing program, is so that we can learn from the technology and see what's happening and see these effects as they're happening, rather than, you know, be surprised, and so we can prepare.
In terms of, this is another question from the panel, from the audience. Are you seeing reactions from the general public? Is anyone coming to you and saying, you know, I saw something, it was really cool or really neat, or, oh my goodness, I saw them testing on our roadways and I don't like it. Have you had public reaching out? I see Carol shaking her head, yes.
Yeah, we've had them. And this is specifically because we're a state DOT, right? So entire state of Maryland, there's a high probability that someone's going to say something. And we've had a lot of, you know, there's Teslas out there. I don't know if they have their hands on the wheel. Or my Tesla can't see the turn off because the lane striping isn't right. There's also been, interestingly enough, the education sector, if you will, the younger STEM and high school level student education is actively getting involved in autonomous vehicle technology. And so we're seeing an increase there, and they want us to go talk to them. So we're seeing a lot of that also, which you wouldn't think that's the first thing that comes to mind, but that is happening in Maryland right now.
Anybody else having interactions with the general public?
So far, it's been pretty positive as far as, you know, we just started a few weeks ago, so there's only been a handful of folks that have had opportunity to take the vehicle. So like we do have the survey out, so we've started to get some folks responding to the survey. And so far, so good.
Okay. Anthony, did you have
I would just say my sample size is kind of biased. It's a bunch of people that I work with saying, I saw one in my neighborhood today.
I can imagine. Well, if people are seeing it and they're reaching out, I guess we should at least have some kind of explanation as to what are the benefits for the general public in having autonomous vehicles? And Carol, I'll turn that over to you to answer that question.
I mean, there's a lot of benefits, and I mean, the first one that everyone just goes to, the primary one, is safety, right? This is the fundamental technology that can help us achieve Vision Zero. There's not been anything else up until this point with autonomous vehicle technology that can help us get to Vision Zero. And that is something that a lot of us are clutching our claws into and saying, we have to be able to push this forward. There's already studies out there on the technology. And this is something I tell to my leadership. They're like, oh, AVs, they won't be here for 50 years. And I'm like, no, wait, hold on. The benefits of the automated features that are being put out there today are already coming back to us. And if we could just keep that momentum going, we're going to get even more. I mean, there's a study on the Institute of Insurance has done these studies to see, like, it's not 2 to 5%, it's 25 to 50% reduction in these types of crashes, the rear ends, the lane departures, etc. Can you imagine if we add on to that and start making sure that the patterns of driving are similar and there's not this weird shockwave thing going on? So the safety benefits are absolutely there. You mentioned equity and access to mobility. Those are other really big ones. Can you imagine that your quality of life improving? And the one we go to usually is aging, right? So our grandparents are driving and then the next day they can't. That quality of life for them drops. They were independent, now they're not. Can you imagine someone who was never able to go somewhere and now they have the opportunity to wheel themselves in a car and now they're going where they want to go on their own? So that's a huge quality of life benefit that the public could tap into. And then I think some of it will have to talk to the communities and see, well, what does your community specifically want? You know, some of them may be very interactive with young people and all that. And so we want to be more careful with the types of vehicles that are out there. And then some people, you know, so we need to talk to our communities and see if there are other benefits that they see and needs that they want addressed first. So don't just deploy technology for the sake of technology, deploy it for the needs of those communities.
No, thank you, Cal. That's a good point. I think we have one more question before we do our closing statement, so to speak. There's a question about the non-tech business professional. In terms of AV, is there the ability to create more human-centered connection to AVs? And this is, I'm going to tie this really into the last question, and then I can go around to each one of you. The way they asked the question was human-centered connections to AVs in terms of design process or something else. But my question really is, based on the experiences that each of you have in your specific jurisdictions, what would you say to planners, engineers, and those in the industry who are in the business of creating this innovation? What should they know? What lessons do you think are key or important that you can take away from your specific experiences that maybe can help another jurisdiction not make those same mistakes? So I'll go to all of you. I'll start with Etta and Dale, and then I'll go to Anthony and finish up with Carol.
Dale, I know he was having some Wi-Fi issues. Can you hear me? Are you able to respond?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think when I had my Wi-Fi issue, my camera was cut off. So, you know, there's a lot to learn. I think we're still trying to figure out, you know, what kind of supporting infrastructure I mentioned earlier, you know, what kind of connectivity, you know, how will these sensors get integrated into urban design? You know, how will these vehicles connect and support, you know, more traditional transit operations? You know, I think it opens up just a whole world of possibilities. I mean, Anthony's comments about curbside management, you know, again, my project is a low-speed shuttle, and its scale is almost perfect, in my opinion, for urban-sized blocks. It's much more manageable, I think, from a curbside standpoint than having 10 TNCs, you know, all pulling in at the same time, trying to deliver essentially the same passenger capacity. And there's a really important sort of, urban planning, urban design concepts that are all going to evolve out of this technology as it, emerges. And I think it's actually pretty exciting. And as an old guy and an old transit guy, it takes a lot to get me excited about the industry again. But I think there's some really cool applications that can come from this. And there's probably bigger land use issues and other things, but I'll refrain from kind of getting in the ditch on this conversation.
Thank you. Anthony?
To the industry, I would say I've heard from some members of the industry that they've had a lot of success in, they've experienced the most success when they've prioritized the service that they're providing rather than showcasing the technology. So if you can enter a community, or if you're thinking about starting up a testing program and can provide deliveries or can provide shuttles, people seem to be more open to accepting a delivery or taking a shuttle ride to their appointments, more so than they would say, jump in an autonomous vehicle for the sake of getting into an autonomous vehicle. When you prioritize the service, the apprehensions that people have over the technology seem to fade away. To the regulators, yes, maybe this is more to the local jurisdictions. There are a lot of benefits that your government, the jurisdiction you work for, can experience, can realize through a testing program. We have a good relationship with our operators in that they've done a really good job of providing us a lot of information about our right-of-ways, where in instances where maybe striping isn't as clear, or the roadway needs to be improved, signage needs to be improved for either clarity or obstruction, trees and things like that. We really appreciate that. We have regular meetings with them where they give us their feedback on our right-of-way, and it helps us from both an operations perspective. We get people out there to fix the signs, trim the trees, stripe the roads, but also from a policy perspective, what do we mean when we post signs? What does this mean? And it's really allowed us to reflect and overall better improve the condition of our right-of-way.
Thank you. And Carol, I think you're going to be the last one as we wrap up here.
Sure, and that was a big question. I was trying to think of a way of concisely trying to answer that. I'm going to try and touch on the blue-collar jobs just really quickly and say that there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. If you're talking about connected vehicle technology, I need comms. And when I mean comms, I mean I need fiber, I need something to backhaul data and push it to cars. There's a lot of roadway out there. That means a lot of construction to put out that infrastructure. So that's still gonna happen. You still need that public outreach, and that means going door to door. That means having community meetings. That means, so you need people to help you manage that. There's obviously going to be this change similar to how you were thinking about, like a coal mine or different now to renewable energy. There is a little bit of that, I think, with AVs. You are moving towards the tech jobs. It doesn't mean that blue collar needs to just be left alone. There are ways of turning their skill sets or enhancing their skill sets to become part of the tech world. The tech world is big. There's a lot of things that can still be done that are not like so complicated, or that high school diploma can't help you move forward. So I think there's still opportunities there. Planning wise, the one thing I'll say to traditional planners is don't silo yourself into the mentality that AV or autonomous vehicles means single occupancy vehicles. It can, but if you're part of the conversation now and you help to shape the future, those last mile opportunities that Dale was just mentioning are huge. Our transit administration in Maryland has said, where you don't have the funding to maintain a transit system across the entire state all the time and ensure it's there forever. So how do you consolidate the trunk of the transit system, make sure that always stays there functional, works for everybody. But then what does that mean for last mile? That means opportunities for those companies, those smaller shuttles to get really into those smaller neighborhoods, bring people to transit, and then you can reduce the single occupancy vehicles. So that's the thing for planners, that there are ways of thinking differently and moving people in different ways. E-scooters is the perfect example. Nobody was expecting that. Suddenly it's the big thing. So there are new mobility options. There's new ways people want to move. There's new land use needs. Absolutely, especially now in the COVID pandemic, things change. And then I guess a big lesson learned for us was no one is an expert. Everyone at first is like, oh, I know about autonomous vehicles. I don't believe there really is one expert in autonomous vehicle technology. You get to a point, then you discover something new, and you're like, oh dear. So just keep learning, and the way to do that is to keep expanding and diversifying who you're talking to. I never thought that I would talk to a medical center and see and understand how we can work with them on autonomous vehicle technology. That just wasn't something I thought about, but now it is. So keep learning and keep talking to everybody you can. So hopefully that answered a few questions.
I thank you all very much. It was a very informative session, and for cities and states who are deploying or getting ready to deploy testing or mapping in their cities, I strongly encourage them to reach out to each one of you individually. Thank you again, and have a wonderful afternoon.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.